Consumers are not educated. They aren't very aware of what their options are. They're running to fintechs that aren't backed in the same way that a big bank is, and it is problematic.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of The Blunt Dollar. I'm super excited to have on the show today Julia Carreon. Julia has been on the front lines of financial disruption for years. She's held leadership roles at Wells Fargo and Citi, where she spent nearly 2 decades driving digital transformation.
I believe the big banks are falling behind and that they have not been innovating fast enough. Part of that is integrations between fintechs and big banks. We are at an inflection point, and people really do need to catch up in order to be relevant for the next generation.
Why are we not moving faster?
I think it's an all problem, not just one single thing. One of the dynamics that not a lot of people talk about is the fact that
this is The Blunt Dollar with Ignacio Ramirez. Quick disclaimer, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers and do not constitute financial investment or legal advice. This content is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a substitute for professional advice. Always do your own research and consult a qualified advisor before making any financial decisions. All investments involve risk, including the potential loss of capital. And now, let's get started with the episode.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of The Blunt Dollar. I'm super excited to have on the show today Julia Carreon. Julia has been on the front lines of financial disruption for years and has spent a career modernizing how banks and wealth management firms serve the next generation of investors. She's held leadership roles at some of the biggest names in finance, such as Wells Fargo and Citi, where she spent nearly 2 decades driving digital transformation and helping these institutions prepare for a world where Gen Z and millennials are calling the shots. She's a go-to expert on how younger generations think about money, how they invest, how they save, and how they expect financial institutions to keep up. She's been deep in the trenches of AI, fintech, and digital strategy, helping banks figure out how to stay relevant in an era where big tech is creeping into finance and robo-advisors are changing the game. So today, of course, we'll be getting into all of that. We'll answer questions such as, are financial firms adapting fast enough, or are they about to get left behind? How is AI changing wealth management? And what happens when companies like Apple decide they want a piece of the finance industry? Julia has seen these shifts firsthand, and she's got some serious insights on what's next. So let's get into it. Julia, welcome to The Blunt Dollar.
Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here. You know, Ignacio, I love doing these kinds of shows, and I am so honored that you had me on. So thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in. For those of you that don't know, Julia is a regular speaker. She's done many podcasts and also a very prolific LinkedIn creator. So if you haven't checked out her profile, please do. Let's get things started. Julia, tell us a bit about yourself. You worked for 20 years at Wells Fargo. What did you do over there exactly?
Well, so I did a lot of different things, but most of my time was spent as the chief digital officer for the private bank of Wells Fargo, which was a role that I got after the financial crisis, and Wells Fargo absorbed Wachovia Securities, which was one of it was the biggest merger in U.S. banking history at that time. So one of the things I like to talk about, which we can get into later, is all the things I learned about doing one of the biggest integrations in banking history.
That's fascinating. We are definitely going to get into that. But I wanted to start talking about young people and Gen Z before we get into that part of the conversation. Because obviously you cannot talk about digital disruption in banks and wealth management without thinking about who's coming next, the next generation of customers. And we've heard you in the past say that Gen Z is like a meteor that wiped out the dinosaurs, except that in this case, the dinosaurs are traditional financial institutions. And we've seen these young people grow up with smartphones glued to their hands, which means they think digital first in everything they do. So my question for you is, do you think financial institutions are catching up fast enough to this Gen Z revolution and their consumption patterns, or are they still living in a prehistoric mindset?
So I want to answer this in an interesting fashion for your podcast because I'm so excited about your show. But I have been very consistent that I believe the big banks are falling behind and that they have not been innovating fast enough. And I do think that part of that is that a lot of the integrations between fintechs and big banks have been failing. And the big banks are sitting on such convoluted and difficult, the legacy, the big boys and girls are sitting on such legacy tech stacks that are so convoluted that they have not been able to innovate fast enough. And I do really feel like we are at an inflection point and people really do need to catch up in order to be relevant for the next generation. I really think it's potentially at a crisis mode, I'll be honest.
And why is it the case? I mean, you say you've been consistent in your messaging, that you've been emphasizing the need to move faster and to catch up with all these startups. What is the problem? Is top management in these big financial institutions oblivious to all these changes? Are they aware of the need to move forward? But is it just that the structures are not flexible enough? In your view, why are we not moving faster?
So I think it's an all and problem, not just one single thing. One of the dynamics that not a lot of people talk about is the fact that the haptic memory, so your touch and sight, all of your senses, of Gen Z are, as you said, digital first, but baby boomers are still largely in charge at big banks. And there has been a disconnect between baby boomers really understanding that this is a real problem and they are controlling the purse strings at these firms. And then frankly, their compensation structures are very much incentivized to solve short-term problems. And this has been a long-term problem that needed serious thought. I don't know if you've heard this, but one of my ideas after the financial crisis was for all of the big banks to join a consortium and band together to appeal to the next generation in messaging, financial literacy, education, all of those things, and do it in a branded way that was not anonymous, but consistent across all the banks, so that this next generation wouldn't just be feeling like you were pushing product. And I pitched that idea to the head of marketing at Wells Fargo at the time, and I got turned down. And look, I think now you see in the marketplace, everything is fractured, and we have started to see pockets of fraud by fintechs. I should have picked up the name of that big bank, of that fintech that failed, and now that all that money is lost. Those things are happening because consumers are not educated. They aren't very aware of what their options are. They're running to fintechs that aren't backed in the same way that a big bank is. And it is problematic. And I have been saying that for a long time. And I really think we're starting to see the reckoning of that with these failures. And then again, of the banks still struggling to catch up.
So if you had to give a forecast of what is going to happen maybe 10, 15, 20 years down the road with big financial institutions, what would it be? Are they going to lose market share to all these smaller startups that are maybe smaller, but really trying to capture a niche and a little part of the whole value offering that wealth managers have? Or will they, under pressure, finally manage to put the resources, hire the people, just to survive on time to the demands from the new generation?
Look, I think that my answer is that I hope that banks get it together, right? Because a regulated system that protects consumers is extremely important. And then perhaps maybe loosening regulation on the big US banks so that they can innovate faster might have a beneficial effect on what goes on in the United States. And we both know, right, that what goes on in the United States, the whole rest of the world follows, right? Because we are the 800-pound gorilla over here.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I like to think of the US as the director of the orchestra, and definitely they're setting the tone for the rest of the finance industry. And on top of that, of course, the SEC being one of the, if not the most important financial regulator out there, will also set the tone for everyone else when it comes to any matters related to the finance industry. I love that concept of haptic memory. By the way, I didn't know about that before I was preparing for this show. So basically, it's like a fancy way of saying that we're shaped by the way we grew up touching and interacting with things. And obviously, for Gen Z, that's all about smartphones, right? How they swipe, the tap, the double clicks. They do all of that faster than the baby boomers. And we will need to adapt to that. And talking about younger generations, once again, I think a big topic is finance literacy. You've said that while Gen Z is more tech savvy than any other generation, and I think that's pretty undeniable, their financial literacy often hasn't caught up with their investing enthusiasm. And it's like a lot of people have been heading headfirst into crypto and meme stocks, but sometimes without even knowing what basic concepts such as compounding interest works. So it's like jumping into the deep end of a pool without learning how to swim first. And obviously, social media has magnified all of that and has added fuel to the fire. So my question for you is, how do we bridge the gap between Gen Z's appetite for investing and their understanding of financial basics?
So this is a knife to my heart, right? Because I predicted this disconnect in 2008, which is why I said that all of the big banks should be contributing to this branded campaign that lifted all ships and did the financial literacy that you are talking about. So look, I actually think that there is a gap in the marketplace for somebody to do that education in a way that resonates, right? Like what kind of influencer or whatever. By the way, there is now an interesting backlash against influencers that's happening. So maybe things will right size a little bit more. But, the amount of financial literacy that's been getting off of TikTok, it's a problem because a lot of these people, A, don't know what they're talking about themselves, and B, they have a hidden agenda. And so I do think that there is a gap in the marketplace for that. And I'll be honest with you, I left my job at Citibank in August, and I've been trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. And one of the things I talked about with a girlfriend is, should we figure out how to stand up a financial literacy curriculum that then you sell to the big banks and then you try to do some kind of consumer model, or B2B model. You're going to have to cut that direct to consumer model or something. I don't know. I do not have a good answer for how we resolve this issue, but I agree with you that it is one. And it's sadly been one that has been in the making for a long time.
What I think it's a little bit unfair is that we tend to put all the burden of this problem on banks. But if you ask me, a lot of the problem comes from the way our educational system is set up. I think we should be learning about all of this stuff in schools, actually. Kids are learning calculus, but they're graduating without understanding how to file taxes, how to budget for rent, or how to invest for their future. What needs to change to bring this financial literacy into schools? And why do you think it's taking so long to make this a reality, not only in the States, but all around the world?
So look, I think, boy, we are really going in a great direction here, because I think that especially I'll speak for the United States, we have lost our way in terms of teaching, to your point, kids practical skills. And that doesn't just include, financial literacy and the things that you've talked about, taxes and basic investing skills. We have lost our way. We don't teach people how to cook. They don't know how to feed themselves, right? When they grow up, they DoorDash everything. I mean, there is a massive social consequences. You don't learn wood shop, you don't, right? Like there are serious societal consequences for the fact that we have lost our way in terms of teaching practical skills. And so I think we are like really at the cusp of a cultural reckoning, and it is going to be fascinating to see how it plays out.
Could the secret be gamification? We've seen platforms like Robinhood obviously nailing gamification, but in a way that was more focused on fun than financial education. So could we actually use this gamification concept to teach financial literacy instead of encouraging risky behavior? Do you think the answer will go in that direction?
I do. And I know that that I've been speaking about the impact of gamification and the importance of it. And look, we can touch on AI right now. I think what we're seeing with DeepSeek and the ChatGPT latest models and Grok, I think we will see an acceleration of gamification with AI. So something that everybody's taken much longer to accelerate in terms of marketplace solutions. I think we are right about to see a mad acceleration of that. And I think you're right. I think gamification is going to be really, really interesting, and we'll start to see it move faster.
Why do you think AI?
Do you agree? Do you agree?
Well, I was going to ask, like, why do you think AI will turbocharge gamification? Is it because it's going to help to hyper-personalize the content? Is that it?
No, I mean, I actually think that the AI will help build the tools faster, right? Like gamified tools will, I mean, the capabilities of this next generation of AI are going to allow things to get done faster. And you're going to be able to teach them to do things that before required a person, right? So let me just think about it in my life. My team brought the first tablet app for advisors to the street, back around 2014. And we did a very basic discovery tool that was gamified, a little card game that then the results saved back to CRM. Okay. AI could have built my discovery tool in like 10 minutes. Do you know what I mean? Where before it took me an MVP of 9 months to do, it was actually 18 months. So that's really what I think.
That's pretty cool. Actually, can you walk us through that story? So 2014, first time a tool of this nature was launched. How was it? Like, how did you have the idea? How did you implement it? It's like a decade ago, and from what you're saying, it seems like it was a massive task. Today, we would probably do that in
if
a
you
few
enjoy
days,
the
but at
dollar,
the time, what
filter
did you have to
takes,
go
the
through
stories,
to launch?
and the laughs, the easiest way to support the show is by tapping that subscribe button right now while you're listening. And here's my promise. If you do, I'll keep bringing you honest conversations, fresh perspectives, and the kind of finance talk that's engaging, insightful, and worth your time. Thanks so much for being here, and let's keep these great finance conversations going.
So the output for our tablet app, which was trademarked as Mobile Advisor at Wells Fargo, the idea came to me in 2010 as part of my Future of Advice strategy, where I was seeing that banks were taking too long to, accelerate the digital agenda. And I got funding. I got $50,000 at the time to do a year-long research project. And out of that research project, we came up with the idea of a tablet app. And I can't remember when the iPad came out, I think in 2010. So we were right at the cusp of that being new technology. We were doing the research before the tablet app, even the Microsoft app, Apple iPad came out. And then, and so we were able to fast track our requirements because we had all of this research that we had done before it hit. And so, that's how we did it. We did it with a lot of research, a lot of, me and my team pressing on executives for the fact that the future was coming. And then, and we took a card game that the company had already developed and we digitized it. I mean, thank you for saying it's really cool because it was really cool at the time and we were way ahead of the street when we did it. And ultimately that app got released to 16,000 advisors.
And what did the tool exactly do?
Well, the first I moved on to, my focus was on something else, but the first generation of it was to allow an advisor to go to a client's house, do basic discovery, client discovery with them, do, basic things on their CRM, and then they could dictate the client meeting on their way home. If they, had a place to sit their phone up, they could dictate meeting notes from that client meeting and it would save back to our CRM. And the productivity on that was huge because so many advisors would go to client meetings and then have to type the notes by hand after they went to their kid's soccer game. So we were using voice, we were using gamification, and we were using, and we were saving it all back to our ugly old tech stack in the back end a decade ago.
Oh, that's pretty cool. It's funny because it sounds pretty basic, right? But a lot of times, like the best IT solutions are those that solve those little painful problems that a lot of people can relate with, rather than the massive, super innovative, futuristic things that we could only dream of.
100%.
And yeah, I can totally understand why your project was a success because, I work in wealth management. We spend a lot of time typing things manually, and these kind of things are always huge in terms of productivity gains.
Well, and
Cool.
then think about the compliance implications, right? So a lot of times the SEC wants those meetings documented, and a lot of the time they're not. And so it isn't just a productivity play, but it's also a compliance play.
Yeah, 100%. Gosh, love it. Love those stories from finance a few years ago because it really shows.
From back in the old days?
Yeah, back in the old days. Like I started working in 2012, so it was more or less at that time.
Oh my gosh, I'm so old.
No, come on. You still have all your career in front of you. So I want to go back to the education and social media platforms. You briefly touched upon influencers, which is obviously a very important source of information for a lot of Gen Zs and millennials, even a little bit less for baby boomers, I guess. My question for you is, what is the responsibility of these social media platforms and influencers when it comes to educating audiences about finance?
Well, you mean like, for example, does Instagram and Twitter or X have a responsibility to be monitoring the content and all of that? Or do you
moderating content, separating what's advice from what is just neutral information, what is correct information, what is wrong information, what are get-rich-quick schemes versus what is like useful stuff? Yeah, I mean, who is responsible for monitoring all this information and ensuring that what is being said is truthful and not misleading?
Oh gosh, friend, man, that is a big loaded question. I love it. Look, I think I'm going to have an answer that's probably not politically correct, and that is that I do not believe that any of these sites should actually be censoring speech. And I'll tell you why. Because anybody's definition of it could be arbitrary, right? Who is to say what is true and not true? And I think that we are seeing a reckoning of that. And it's happening in the US. I mean, Instagram and Facebook have gotten rid of their moderators, right? For the most part, they're fact checkers.
Okay, so let me rephrase, because maybe the truth and false part is not exactly where I wanted to go. It's more about when it comes to specifically financial content, what is suitable content for a specific audience versus what is leading content that may not be suitable for a specific audience.
So here's what I think. I think that is the responsibility of regulators, and I believe that they are probably behind. So, you see it all the time that regulators are behind the times, but I absolutely think that the SEC, OCC, and to the extent that the CFPB stays around in the United States, it's the responsibility of regulators, because these bad actors are, to your point, causing harm to consumers. And they are the ones responsible for regulating harm, what's policing what's right and not right for consumers. And what's a great question. I don't know if they do that today, at scale. I know they do it in pockets, but I don't know if they do it at scale. Do you? No?
So I have a little bit of a different answer to yours. I agree with what you said, but I think it shouldn't solely be the responsibility of regulators. I think everyone has a part of responsibility. So yes, first of all, I think we would need more guidance from regulators across the globe. And I've talked about this in previous episodes. I collaborated with the CFA Institute on a report about finfluencers, and one of the main recommendations of the report was that regulators across the globe should sit down and set up the rules so that everyone is clear of what we can do and not do, and say and not say when it comes to financial markets in social media, because it's not clear at the moment. But again, it's also the responsibility of the content creators too, to ensure that, as you were saying at the beginning, either there's no hidden agenda, or if there's a hidden agenda, that they actually disclose it so that people consuming the content they produce are at least aware if there's like some sort of financial interest behind what they're saying or not. And then they can judge and decide how to interpret the information they're receiving. So it's not easy, and I think it's going to take many, many years. But I guess the only way to solve this problem is by having everyone sitting around the table, all the regulators across the globe, setting the rules clearly, and then widespreading the information through the usual channels. And then we'll have a healthier social media landscape when it comes to finance, I think.
I agree. I mean, one of the things that's fascinating about this that we could talk about, and by the way, I'm spending more time on Twitter, and my account is unlocked. I had a big account on Twitter back in the day, and I had to lock it when I went to work at Citi, but now I don't work at Citi, so it's public. And I was really fascinated by the fact that David Sachs, who is a entrepreneur and VC and super influential guy, was talking about something this week. He literally did not have a basic clue about how banks worked, like literally fundamentally. And I was shocked that a big account from somebody that smart, he's in tech, he's not in finance, lacked a basic understanding. So and he went viral for it, of course, like not, in a funny way. But yeah, I do think that the rise of misinformation is significant, and the bigger your account, the more damage you can do if you don't know what you're talking about.
100%. And you're touching about upon a very interesting concept, which is the concept of trust. And I wanted to ask you about that.
Well,
Trust younger generations and financial institutions. So we know that a lot of younger generations have serious trust issues with traditional financial institutions. It's very well documented.
yeah.
A lot of people obviously prefer to consume financial information when it comes to their personal finances via their mobile phone rather than meeting in person their financial advisor and so on. And my question for you is, do you think it's too late for traditional financial institutions to rebuild this trust with Gen Z and millennials? Is there still hope, or is it too late?
Look, I again have to believe that it's not too late. And here's why I think that is you have a couple of big fintechs lose consumers' money, and then have the regulators be unable to get it back. And it will be a reckoning, right? Like people will get it. And I'm going to give you an example from mine. So I'm Gen X. I am not a baby boomer. I worked at a .com. Back then fintechs were called .coms. And my company forced me to move my little 401k from Vanguard to their fintech provider, and they were committing fraud. So, and thousands of people in San Francisco who had moved their retirement accounts to this fintech or .com lost their money, and we had to advocate for the district attorney of San Francisco to go after them to try to get our money back. I was 29 years old. I'm very candid on these podcasts. I didn't come from a family with money. I didn't know anything about finance when I started in finance, like many of these younger generations today don't. And I had saved $33,000 in my 401k, and I only got $13,000 back. And it is a lesson that I never forgot. Like, I love banks because of that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I love regulated institutions. I am not some risky person who's going to throw money to some place that I don't know. But it's because I learned that lesson the hard way when I was 29 years old.
Wow. That's a very interesting story.
I've never told that story on a podcast, by the way. So that's my first.
Oh gosh, awesome! We're getting all the juicy Julia stories today. Yeah, it's crazy because for all the criticism that big financial institutions receive, at the end of the day, maybe there's a lack of better alternatives, and is the lesser evil, as some people say. Of course, no institution is perfect, but when you hear stories like yours, you realize that it might not be as bad as some people say after all.
No, but look, I do want to say that I will die on my hill that financial institutions have an urgent obligation to remove friction from their processes, and they are not doing that. Like, if when I go to try to exercise my stock options that I get granted from from Wells and Citi, every year the process makes me want to take my laptop and hurl it out the balcony. It is the most horrendous pain in the neck you will ever imagine. And every year I forget how to do it. Meaning it's so complicated. I have no idea what I'm doing. So it's absurd that it is 2025 and that is still the case. Don't you agree? I mean, it drives me insane.
I was actually saving this for later in the conversation, but let's get into it now. So, obviously, younger generations expect seamless digital journeys from onboarding to portfolio reviews. So my question for you as an expert on the topic is, what does an ideal end-to-end digital journey look like for wealth management clients? And where is it that wealth managers often stumble?
Yeah, look, I have been calling for 18 years about the fact that hyper-personalization and a client's being able to make the choice that they can come in and out of digital as they see fit, right? So if I'm working on something and I see my performance report show up on my screen and I have a question for my FA about what is going on there, maybe there's something going on in the market, I had said, you should be able to ping your advisor. And if your advisor has their button on, you know, their green light, like, you think of it as the, old, Peanuts, right? Where the Lucy would have the therapist is I'm in sign. You would be able to just go talk to your advisor about a question. I mean, think about how sticky that would be if that was available 15 years ago, which is what I said it should be. And what's crazy about that is that whiteboarding tools were available online that long ago. My dad was doing tutoring with my son 15 years ago online. They were sharing a whiteboard online. Like, how come banks couldn't have figured that out? Think about that. They still don't have that, right? I mean, so there are a number of engagement tools that I think people in the financial services industry have not been creative enough about. And with each passing day, we kind of get more and more behind. And I think it goes back to the gamification conversation. And again, I think that goes back to who is in power with the purse strings and how urgently do they believe this is a problem.
I think it also comes to the concept of digital transformation, which is obviously a big buzzword when you work within a bank. But you've stressed many times in the past that digital transformation is not only about having a shiny new app. It's a much more comprehensive concept. So, in your opinion, what does true digital transformation in banking look like?
Yeah, for me, it literally goes from the bottom of your tech stack to the top. It means re-architecting that so that you are able to understand that there are multiple channels that a client wants to do business in, and you are able to serve them up an anytime, anywhere interaction at any given time. And look, I mean, in many big banks, at least in the United States, I don't know how it is in Europe, the things that's available to you on a desktop are not available to you on a phone. And sometimes that makes sense because you just don't want to read a big PDF on your phone. But thinking through every single important client journey and tackling how a customer would want to do business with you is what transformation looks like, right? Like the ability to do a meeting with your advisor by Zoom with an interactive whiteboard was something I said we should have done 15 years ago.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, again, like I have the feeling that big institutions are struggling with this because it's something that touches upon literally every single part of the group. And at the end of the day, the only way to make it happen, to make change happen at these levels, is to really make it part of the core values and ingrain it in the DNA of the institution. Otherwise, if only a few people working in the innovation part of the group and so on believe in it, nothing is going to happen. You really need to have a buy-in from all the stakeholders in the group. But I agree with you.
Well, I just love that you said that, because I actually at Wells, I started an initiative where I said, this was 15 years ago, everybody is an innovation executive. Like, put on your innovation hat, be thinking about what your clients are asking for, and make sure that you own it. I don't own it. My team can't be the only one that owns it. It's too big of a boat to lift. So you're absolutely right. It needs to be inculcated into the DNA of the company.
100%. We all have to become ambassadors. I want to talk about another part of digital transformation, but which is obviously very timely, which is AI, and specifically how AI is revolutionizing or is about to revolutionize every part of the financial services industry. So, in your view, how do you think AI is going to change the sector? Will it replace advisors, or are we moving towards a model where we're going to have a hybrid between just machines and just humans as in the past?
So my answer, which is advisors will not go away. The reality is that the investments business is a game of human psychology, and people want to believe that it isn't, right? I think AI though has the ability to accelerate the degree to which digital transformation can be executed, as long as the data is all in one place, right? Like, and I'm going to give a specific example. At most large institutions, you've got your risk profile that you have to fill out. It is the KYC and your risk tolerance profile. Those are important pieces of information that tell you who I am. And then you've got my demographic information, and you've got my preferences that you might have collected about, do you want your paper statement and blah, 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 right? All of those things at most banks are in different places because they were built in silos by people who thought know your client was a check the box exercise because it was driven by compliance, when in fact the name of it is know your client. So shouldn't we have been using that to start building a really rich profile of the client and use it as a baseline and turn compliance into a competitive advantage, and then put everything together so that then you could layer AI and it wouldn't hallucinate? Well, guess what? That didn't happen. So most firms have demographics and data in one place, KYC in another, risk tolerance in another. And so, I mean, I know that the banks know that, and they're trying to get their act together, and they're trying to put all these pieces together. But that is when AI is going to be powerful for wealth management.
I think that's interesting because we're touching upon another whole different concept, which is the concept of privacy. So obviously with hyper-personalization comes also the risk that, in order to achieve that level of customization, firms need to harness client data while avoiding the creepiness of overstepping into privacy boundaries. So my question for you is, how can wealth managers really leverage data and technology to deliver that truly tailored advice you're advocating for without crossing the ethical and privacy boundaries? Hey there, quick ad break. Do you work in the finance industry and have a genuinely interesting story to share? I'm always on the hunt for great guests who bring raw, unfiltered insights to the table. Or maybe you know someone with a story worth telling? Please put us in touch. You can reach out to me directly via LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. And now, back to the show.
Yeah, well, listen, I'm going to share another story I've never shared on social media. I have traveled extensively for my entire career. So 2 to 3 weeks a month for 20 years. And I checked in to a very fancy hotel in Tiburon and went into the shower because I had a dinner meeting. I stepped into the shower and I heard my name. I'm in the shower of a hotel that I had just checked in. I swear to God. And it said, Julia Carreon, do you want to something or other about lunch or dinner at the destination of something or other? I am not kidding you. I freaked out so badly that I almost slipped in the shower and could have killed myself by hitting my head. I thought a man had walked into my room. It was a male voice. Do you have any guesses for what's going on?
Oh my God.
I know, I'm telling you, it was the TV. So they had, this was 15 years ago, they had a TV. So when I came on, I turned on the TV and I usually put it on mute when I do, but for some reason I had it. TV was talking to me, and obviously I had checked in and it had my name. So that was an example of like a creepy experience that they were trying to be hyper-personalized, and the way that it landed on me, because I had no context for it, almost caused me to slip in the shower and crack my head open. So I think what I want to say about your question is you have to constantly be keeping close to your clients and advisors as a digital transformation technologist to make sure that you are always understanding what is in context for your client and what does that experience look like and how do you rein it in and or put more gas on it. And I think that I have a saying that I'm very famous for, which is that context saves lives. So that's the answer.
Yeah. And yeah, setting the context and having the end customer being aware of everything happening at all times. I guess that's the secret, so that you don't get like the kind of surprises that you got in the shower. Different topic now. Still talking about wealth management, but talking about social media. How can wealth management firms use social media effectively to convey their messages and create a funnel of clients and as a marketing and communications tool in general?
Yeah, listen, this one is easy for me. Every single major executive should be on social media and they should be managing it themselves. Now, I get that it's regulated, and I guess you know, if you're licensed, you have to run it by compliance. But the executives who are winning at telling the story are telling it themselves. And obviously in the world, there is nobody doing that better than Elon Musk, right? And he's not in finance, but like, I don't know if you know, he did a whole thing on how executives should be getting media training. And it's not media training to be stiff. It's to be real. And then I think that goes to advisors which are very, again, heavily regulated, should be figuring out how to tell your story in your own way, because I'm telling you, authenticity wins. That's it. The beginning and the end.
And talking about Musk, obviously we're talking about big tech, and we are seeing tech giants already shaking up finance, and their entry into wealth management feels almost inevitable. They have a ton of data capabilities. They're experts in the seamless user experiences we were just talking about. And I think they could pose a serious threat to traditional wealth management and big financial institutions. So my question for you is do you think we're going to see a push from big tech coming into wealth management in upcoming years? And if so, how could that shake up the industry?
Yeah, listen, I think that, so everybody always wants a piece of the financial pie, right? You saw auto dealers become lenders, right? Like this is not new. And I do think that there will be pressure by the big guys to get into the industry. It will be interesting to see how the regulators feel about that. It'll be interesting to see how big banks push back on that. Or I think more likely what you'll see are strategic partnerships where they figure out how to work together. And if they're smart, they will do that so that they, neither side becomes completely irrelevant, right? Like I always talk about relevance and how do you maintain it, and being creative is a way to do that. Again, my idea with the banks banding together, putting aside their brands And doing a consortium on financial literacy would have lifted all ships, and it would have made the next generation not be as wary about banks. And guess what? The big banks in the US couldn't get out of their own way. And look they're losing because of that, right? Like the next generation, to your point, doesn't trust them. So I think it's going to be through creative partnerships or, we'll just start to see people getting disrupted.
I think we already saw that type of partnerships last year. Wasn't it Apple doing a partnership at some point with Goldman Sachs?
Goldman Sachs, yep.
Exactly, for savings accounts and things so you think we're going to go more into that direction where the big tech companies, instead of going solo, they reach out to the big players and they say, hey, let's do something together.
That's my theory. I think that unless something happens with where they're able to use blockchain, like I just don't see it happening anytime like immediately, where they just go out on their own by themselves.
I think where the potential lies is on the fact that a lot of these tech companies know a lot about, consumer behavior, nudging users, and so on, which brings us to the concepts and the to the field of behavioral science, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big fan of that topic too. I think behavioral science has shown that the way financial tools are designed can definitely influence client decisions for better or for worse, from nudging clients to save more to helping them to avoid emotional decision making. It's obviously a very powerful tool, but needs to be used responsibly. How can wealth managers use behavioral science in their digital tools to improve client outcomes without feeling intrusive?
Yeah, I think it's a great topic. I actually am consulting for a great behavioral science company. It's based out of New Zealand, but most of its clients are in the United States. I mean, look, I think that is a really burgeoning and interesting field that, to your point, allows advisors to look really smart and be presenting themselves in a way to their clients that is very rich. And I do think that is another field that is right for AIization, meaning layering AI, like accelerating that whole field using AI.
Yeah. Couple last questions for you. Random question on a different topic, but I know you have some views on this. Esports and financial engagement. You've talked in the past how esports could act as a window into the future of engagement. Younger generations, they don't just watch tournaments online, but they're on Discord, they stream on Twitch, they build virtual worlds with games like Warcraft. And if finance doesn't find a way to meet them in these spaces, could financial institutions become irrelevant?
Look, I think that there are lots of ways that banks could become irrelevant. And again, I think that makes it very dangerous for consumers to get into trouble, right? Like, I also think that the whole gambling, right? Investments is, could become a form of gambling. And then you've got a whole different kind of problem. And look, I've got a 14-year-old son. These kids are expecting to engage and in different ways. And that is why I have been impressing upon the guarded, safe rails of regulated banking to get their act together and lean into this space, right? Because there's a lot of risk and danger out there with all the different ways they could go. And to our earlier conversation, all of the bad actors that are out there.
Yeah, so definitely a space to watch, esports and financial institutions. Let's see how that evolves. One last question for you that I like to ask to all my guests. We have a lot of young listeners, of course, in this podcast. So a bit more philosophical question, but what would your advice be for young professionals in the finance sector? What do they need to hear, but
they rarely do, in your opinion?
We could have talked about this for an hour. This is my favorite subject.
We'll do another episode. Don't worry.
We will. And because we never even talked about how passionate I am about women in finance and women leadership and the importance of having women leaders in the business. Look, the number one bit of advice that I give is, first of all, if you can take a skills personality assessment like Myers-Briggs or Clifton Strengths, and early on in your career, figure out what you are good at. Understand what your superpower is, and then lean into it. Never, ever get away from it, no matter how senior you get in an organization. And I'm going to be very specific. I have dyscalculia. I struggle with math, which is a funny, ironic thing given I've made my career in finance. But I realized that because of my skills, and I'm a Clifton Strengths person, because of my skills, I was an activator. And then my other fifth strength was responsibility. Do you want to know what that meant? I wanted to solve problems, and I wasn't just going to attempt to solve them without finishing them. So I have made my name in the industry for being amazing at execution. And that is because I understood my strengths and I leaned into them. And I never, as I got more and more senior, right, I managed huge budgets and hundreds of people. I always kept my ear to the ground so that I would be able to solve problems. And I always did that. I never got so fancy that I never thought I didn't have to get my hands dirty in order to stay relevant for my job. So that is my number one bit of advice always.
That's a good one. I've done a few of those tests too, and I think it's pretty cool when you start reading which type of personality you are, you have, which parts you should work on, what are your strengths, which direction you should follow. It's very fascinating to read all of that. It's almost scary on how precise it is. But Julia, it's been amazing to have you on the show. Thank you so much for all these valuable insights that you've shared with us. I hope the audience find it useful. I found it super useful. I love the stories you shared and all the views regarding the future of the industry and AI and technology. I'm an optimist by nature, so I'm very excited about what's to come. But yeah, we'll see. In any case, thank you for joining. For all of you that don't know Julia, make sure to follow her on her socials, X and LinkedIn, where she, as I was saying at the beginning, posts very regularly. And Julia, thank you so much, and have a wonderful continuation of 2025.
Thank you.
The Blunt Dollar is written, produced, hosted, and edited by me, Ignacio Ramirez. Everything you hear, concept, script, sound design, and production comes straight from my desk, and occasionally my kitchen table. Thank you so much for listening, and join me in the next episode of The Blunt Dollar for more raw, honest finance conversations.